Thank you. I think it's important that the chair and the public know that there are always debates going on in this building which will determine how the big, beautiful bill is sent to President Trump. One of those debates involves the state and local tax deduction. Another of the debates, which hasn't been as highlighted, involves President Trump's proposal to reduce the marginal rate on manufacturing to 15%. President Trump is rightly obsessed with having America being the world leader in manufacturing. Another one of the debates is what we should do to encourage Americans to have more children. And President Trump has proposed a $5,000 credit for people having children. I think that might not be quite right. I personally prefer a new $5,000 exemption, but nevertheless, there's no time in life in which people are more financially strapped than when they have young children. I am strongly opposed to the so-called SALT caucus of people who desperately want to have a greater deduction for state and local taxes. These people are, as a practical matter, looking to encourage their governors, their school boards, their county boards to raise local taxes. Last weekend when I was home, a county executive in my district, a conservative county executive, begged me not to increase the deduction on property taxes. He is a conservative and did not want to have the liberals on his county board making the case, wouldn't it be great if all of our property taxes and income taxes were tax deductible so we could raise taxes? And I am sure right now, particularly in the more liberal states, places like Governor Newsom in California, places like New York, the governors, the state legislators are waiting to see if they can increase the deduction for state income taxes, for local property taxes, so they can spend more money. We have to realize that if the SALT caucus succeeds, there will be less money available here to lower the income tax on manufacturing as President Trump tries to bring back American manufacturing jobs from China, from Korea, from Mexico. We will not have the money available to do eventually what I would like to do, and that is have a $5,000 personal exemption to help out young couples who are just starting out so they have more income at the time in their life when they need it more than anybody else. I strongly encourage our negotiators to turn back the people who want a big state and local tax deduction, even though Wisconsin is a mildly high tax state. I think encouraging any more taxes anywhere in the country hurts us all as it slowly takes away the freedoms of people in America and makes America more of a country that you would not want to move to and start new manufacturing. That's one of the things that is going on in this building. The next topic to take up, and I'm kind of disappointed we didn't deal with it like we should have in our proposed big, beautiful bill, but I know President Trump's team is concerned about this, is the degree to which so many of our welfare programs are designed to discourage people from getting married. We know that people who get married and have children, well, all types of families have successful children, and I personally know many people who on their own, both men and women, have done a very good job of raising children you would be proud of. In the long run, it is not fair to the next generation to discourage people from getting married and having children. Right now, there are many, many federal programs what used to be called food stamps, the low-income housing, the Medicaid, which is health care for the poor, the Pell Grants. All of these programs are designed to penalize young couples who get married. If you have a single parent, they may be eligible for all of these programs. If you are married, you may be eligible for none of the programs. I think the most generous of the group is low-income housing or Section 8 vouchers, whatever. But in any event, it's not unusual to look up a hypothetical in which if a woman marries, say, the father of her children, she will lose $25,000 to $30,000 a year. This is why, since the Great Society in the 60s, we have gone from a situation in which in the 50s, 4% of the children in this country were born out of wedlock. And now we are in a position in which we have over 40% of the children in the country were born out of wedlock. It did not happen by it did not happen by accident. It happened because the Great Society programs in the 1960s were designed to encourage this sort of behavior. You may say, who wants to discourage people who are married from having children? In fact, Karl Marx, of course, was very opposed to the traditional family. We've known since I've been here, Black Lives Matter made it clear that they were opposed to what they referred to as the Western prescribed nuclear family. And of course, even after Black Lives Matter came out for that, it did not present many of our members, particularly on the Democrat side of the aisle, from standing with Black Lives Matter, a group opposed to the nuclear family. We know that many of the feminists in the 60s, I'm thinking of Kate Millett, who was described as the mother of women's studies classes that are all over our universities, were outright opposed to the nuclear family. It is disappointing we are not doing more in this budget to address that problem, to stop encouraging young people not to be married. And we all by now have run into young couples who may even want to be married, but they won't be married because they lose $20,000 or $25,000 a year. Indeed, in this program, we're expanding the Pell Grant program, a program that was one of these things that has a marriage penalty associated with it. We are expanding the low-income housing tax credits, and while some of those credits do not come with a marriage penalty, particularly when coupled up with state programs, they do have a marriage penalty. Another program we're expanding that's going in the wrong direction. In any event, I encourage President Trump to do what's already going on behind the scenes, and that is work towards, perhaps in our next reconciliation bill, a program to stop the hatred of the traditional family that is the marker of the Democrat Party today. Again, I emphasize we have to look at every one of these programs, the Earned Income Tax Program, the Pell Grant Program, the Low-Income Housing Program, the Section 8 Program, in general, housing authorities. All of them have this hostility. If America's ever going to truly become a great society again, we have to work our way back up to where we were in the 60s and the 50s, where we had 4%, 5% of the children born out of wedlock. By the way, if you read on historic experts on this topic, and I'm talking about people like George Gilder, who is a very bright guy, a lot of times the person who's penalized the most when you set up a society without couples having children is in fact the man in the society who has no purpose in life. As a Indian immigrant in my district told me, in America they have the woman marry the government. And of course I think society's better off if we have the woman marry the father of the children, not the government, like so many members of this conference want to do. The next thing I want to look at, which we're going to be viewing in the next few days, we have a proposed reconciliation bill in front of us, and I was under the impression that this bill would be an opportunity to decrease the amount of government programs, decrease the degree to which we have government programs controlling or directing Americans' lives. One of those programs that I really don't like, the more I talk to experts on the topic, is something called low-income tax credits. These low-income tax credits are tax credits given to property developers equal to 10% of the value of what they spend on new apartments for 9 years in a row. Now, there's a time value of money, but even given the time value of money, it means that the government is paying for 70% of some people's projects. There are some requirements as to who you rent these to, but the requirements are not stringent, and some people point out that we could almost take people at random in the street, and that would be enough to fill their housing units. It really doesn't do a lot to help the so-called low-income people. It does, however, because the government is giving so much money, it does encourage developers to spend far more than they would otherwise on their projects. Why not make Cadillac projects if the government is going to spend or pay for 70% of those projects? Furthermore, as we spend more on the projects, it's going to turn around and result in greater depreciation expense for the wealthiest banks in the country, who frequently wind up buying the credits. For something that should be a relatively simple transaction, once the states get a hold of it, you can wind up with regulations of hundreds of pages that have to be negotiated when you begin running the projects, which obviously means a lot more money for the lawyers and much more difficult for the politicians to understand exactly what is going on. You would think of all the projects out there, all the government programs, this would be the easiest to get rid of because we're supposed to be broke. In fact, under our big, beautiful bill, and I know President Trump wants the most beautiful bill he can on his desk, in this bill we are, in fact, expanding the number of tax credits, which is to say expanding the amount of money that the property developers on these projects are going to make. We are increasing the amount of tax credits that I'm told a very high number going to the biggest 5 banks in the United States, tax credits the banks get. Furthermore, because there's only so many new rental housing units we need, it expands, or you wind up crowding out the what I'll call legitimate developers and legitimate users of low-income housing tax credits. I would hope, as we put together hopefully the final version of the big beautiful bill sometime in the next couple weeks, we look at this. It's not something that costs nothing. It's currently costing us, even under current law, about $13.8 billion a year in tax credits, which are going to these well-connected developers. I think one thing that will also tell you that they're well-connected is it's up to states to distribute which property developers get the credits. Well, what do you think is going to happen? It's going to be the same people who know the same bureaucrats who are connected with the same politicians who are going to get these credits again and again and again. Again, on the face of it, the idea that in the future in this country, the people who build the apartments is going to be determined by state bureaucracies is just an invitation for trouble. The fact that we are paying 70%, it therefore results in a situation in which, given some areas in California in particular, we may be paying more than $95,000 a unit. Does that make any sense at all if our goal is to create lots of new housing units for the so-called poor or working poor? No, you would never do that, except for that's the way the property developers make more money. In any event, I encourage our leadership team, as they are looking for more money to seal the deal on this project. I don't think they have their 217 or 216 votes yet to grab that $13.5 billion. Another thing I'll point out, these credits have been around since the late 1980s, and people might wonder where they came from. I think they probably came from developers who found a way to snooker the poor U.S. Congress in the late 80s. But at the time, Congress felt something had to be done because we had just gotten done with, apparently, decreasing or increasing the depreciation schedules on new residential real estate. So in the early 80s, you could depreciate an apartment building in 15 years. When they changed it to 27 and a half years, it greatly reduced the number of new apartments that people were building, and therefore it was easier to sell to Congress that one way to get more apartments online is to have these ridiculously over-generous credits. I don't know whether I'm going to have much of an impact. One of my goals is I would like to have the credits renamed, instead of the low-income housing tax credits, the big banks, big law firms, and especially well-connected developer tax credits, because I think that would more accurately describe the people who benefit from these credits. In any event, there are some of the issues that I think are going to be debated in the next few days. I hope the press does a good job of covering what low-income housing tax credits really are. I hope the press does a good job of setting before the American public, and particularly the Republican volunteers who did so much to get us here, laying out the differences between the tax cuts based on how high your property or sales taxes are, how high your local property taxes or state sales and income taxes are. We'll see if how our base feels about who we should reward or what type of behavior we should encourage through the tax code. Should we encourage people to have more children? Should we encourage people to work harder? And should we encourage businesses, more manufacturing jobs? Or should we encourage local governments to raise taxes? And finally, in the future, as we determine how we're going to build new apartments in this building, should we encourage these apartments or the builders of the apartments to go through the government accepting lavish tax credits, or should we do it the way we always have in America, and that is let the free market win out? The idea that you cannot build apartment buildings is, on the face of it, preposterous. I know everywhere right now, be it single family or multifamily, the costs are way too high. I would hope that the Speaker would maybe put together a committee or a subcommittee seeing what we can do to lower those costs. But I am told it is possible to lower the costs, and the answer is not paying developers 70% the cost of their project. By the way, I am told I must do this. This was my office's fault. Madam Chair, as I conclude my floor speech today, I'd like to ask unanimous consent to remove.
First.
Yes?
Gentleman yields back.
Yes.
For what
We go-
purpose does the gentleman rise?
Before I begin my floor, after I finish my floor speech today, I'd like to ask unanimous consent to remove Dan Goldman of New York as a co-sponsor of H.R. 1415.
Without objection, so ordered.
And then I move adjournment.
Would the gentleman withdraw his motion?
Sure.
Thank you. Pursuant to Clause 13 of Rule